It's easy to get caught up in defining your startup with industry buzzwords. We're speaking with a founder who's fighting against being placed in a box. Join us in today's conversation with Riley Hughes, founder and CEO of Trinsic, and investor Dalton Wright, as we bring you both sides of A Perfect Pitch. Perfect Pitch is a podcast from Kickstart that reveals the minds of both investors and entrepreneurs throughout a startup's journey. I'm your host, Karen Zonlick, and I'm excited to introduce you to today's guests. So we'll start with Riley Hughes. Riley, you graduated from BYU with a bachelor's in finance, and at the beginning of your career, you founded a company that solved a pervasive problem with scooter handlebars. And I can't wait to hear how you went from that to digital identity, because that is quite the pivot. And in more recent years, you were the venture lead at Self-Sovereign Identity Incubator, a startup accelerator focused on bringing self-sovereign identity solutions to market. And today, you're the co-founder and CEO of Trinsic, the leading infrastructure for building ID tech products using digital wallets and verifiable credentials. And don't worry, listeners, we're going to talk about what that means later. So if that was a little bit of a mind twister for you, we'll figure it all out. And then what else should we know about you, Riley?
Professionally, I got involved with the Self-Sovereign Identity Incubator as a part of my role at Sovereign Foundation, where I was hired as an early employee, and that's really where I got my start in the digital identity world. Personally, I love Utah, but we ended up moving from Utah up to northern Idaho, a town called Coeur d'Alene, to be closer to lots of lakes and rivers and water, and it's been a blast. So I miss seeing you all down there in Utah, but it's fun up here too.
Do you like ski? Do you fish? What was the draw to the lakes and rivers and waters? I'm just curious.
Honestly, I like to sit next to the water and work on my laptop.
Nice.
That's about it.
I read an article once about how the water ions crashing together have a relaxing effect on people. So that makes sense. So Dalton, over to you before I start talking more about water and moving and all of that. It's always great to have you back on the show. You always add a lot to the discussions. We're going to have a link to your bio in our show notes. And Dalton, Gavin gave us a little bit of a teaser in a previous episode, but I think it's time that we officially announce your latest big announcement. Tell us about what that is.
Yeah, with this new fund that we raised, we made the decision to have a more focused effort on building our deal flow and our investment practice in Colorado. So Kurt Roberts, our partner, has done a fantastic job building our reputation and brand in Colorado. He's led some of the best seed investments in the state in recent years. And so I'll be moving my family to Denver this summer to open Kickstart's first non-Utah office. So this isn't in any way de-emphasizing the importance of Utah in our investment strategy, but really kind of elevating Colorado as another market that we think is similar to Utah in a lot of ways in terms of its ability to produce great seed stage companies, and excited to move my family there and really roll up my sleeves and help make Kickstart one of the most active investors in that state as well.
I'll just throw out a plug that if you ever decide to come to Idaho, Coeur d'Alene is a good place for maybe a third Kickstart location.
Okay.
I hear there are great lakes up there.
Great to work by and sit and yeah. Okay, let's dive in. We told listeners that we're going to talk about Trinsic and help them unpack everything I said that you do in the bio. So Riley, what is Trinsic and what does digital identity even mean?
I think most people, when they think of digital identity, they think of a username and password or a button that lets them log in with Google. But if you think about physical identity, real world identity, it is so much more. It spans everything from our government issued ID to how we self-identify on all kinds of traits to things that other people, say about us, like whether we have a degree from a certain university or whether a background check company can vouch for our lack of criminal status or whatever that might be. That doesn't really exist online. When I got involved in this digital identity world, I just thought, wow, we are sending people to outer space. And we have now AI that can generate pictures of corgis in any location on Earth or write better blog posts than I can, or we're editing genes. And yet I still can't even prove that my legal name is Riley Hughes on the internet. That feels like something's off to me. I fast forward into the future. When we get off of the SpaceX ship on our Mars colony, we're probably not going to pull a plastic card out of our pocket to prove who we are. Digital identity will be much better in the future than it is now. Originally, starting Trinsic was really as simple as we're going to figure out how to make that happen.
How do you make that happen? What does that look like?
If you think about the way that it works in the real world, we all carry around a leather pouch in our pocket or purse or backpack or whatever called a wallet. And we carry cards and credentials, which are really attestations inside of that wallet. and we pull those cards out of our wallet and use them throughout our life as needed. So if you want to get on an airplane, you pull a government issued ID out of that wallet and you share it with the attendant, and that TSA agent doesn't believe you because it was you handing them the card. They believe you because they believe that the DMV did a good job of vetting you before they gave you the card. You know what I mean? So they trust the source of that credential. What we're doing is mapping that to the digital world. So our product is a suite of developer tools for building digital wallets that enable people to carry around digital cryptographically signed attestations of all different types. We have customers building use cases in verticals from finance to supply chain to healthcare to government and all sorts in between. The way that I would summarize that, and the way that got my mom to understand what I do, is you use the Apple Wallet. Well, we are a company that allows other companies to add Apple Wallet-like capabilities into their own products. And we enable other companies to embed those capabilities inside their own applications.
It's really exciting and it's very interesting. And I love that you're able to distill it down to what it actually does. Dalton, what did you think when Riley first came in? What were your thoughts? What excited you about the company?
We invested in Trinsic right before the pandemic set in. In fact, I've said before that the last in-person meeting that I did before we all went into lockdown was with Riley. And so we were really excited to close that investment before the world changed. And one of the examples that really stuck with me that's used when people talk about verifiable credentials is just the idea that we way overshare our information. So, just the example of going into a bar, you pull out your ID, you give this credential, the bouncer who is looking over this is able to see your address, your weight, maybe your social security number. These things are all unnecessary in order to determine whether or not you can actually go into this establishment. Really, all they need to know is yes or no, is this person 21 or older? And yet, when we give them this credential, they're able to see all this information about us. And that's not that big of a deal. Most of us aren't all that concerned about what people can see on our IDs. But when you
now we are, that you pointed out how much we're sharing. We just don't think about it, I think. Sorry, I cut you off. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, people have varying degrees of sensitivity around all of this. But when you get into the digital world, Riley articulated this challenge that it's very hard to actually prove anything online. And yet we're spending so much of our time online. That's where our relationships are going in a lot of ways. It's where we're doing our loan applications, where we're getting our mortgages. It's where we're proving our credentials through our professional networks. And yet it's so hard to actually know if any of that information is accurate or true. And so I saw this as kind of twofold in the problems that are outstanding. One, it's hard to prove identity. And then the other problem is that we share so much more information than we actually need to. And that actually makes us more vulnerable to identity theft, having our data used against us by parties that don't have our best interests in mind. It also makes us susceptible to biases and prejudice, perhaps. And so one of the things I really love about this idea of self-sovereign identity or ID tech is the better control over the use of our data and how we have control over it. And also, how can we share the minimum viable data set in order to perform a function online? Riley had spent a number of years really at the heart of some of this development here in Utah with the Sovereign Foundation. And I really loved his scrappiness, resourcefulness, and his passion for this particular problem. And I felt like he was in a unique position to see where the opportunities were and where the deficits were in terms of the current state of development. So when we connected, it felt like Riley's an entrepreneur, has a very, very clear vision about what he wants to do in this world. And he also has the context of where the gaps were in the current state of the market. So we really saw an opportunity to partner up and go after this together.
Yeah. And as you were talking, I'm just thinking about how much easier the life insurance application I just completed would have been had I been able to use this. Like it's just insane. And you're just like, and I'm just uploading all of this personal information. Please be careful with it.
There's increased liability for the counterparties as well. The legislation has been passed in Europe, as well as California, that grants increasing protection for the consumer. At the same time, it creates liability for the underwriters in this case who collect all this information. How is it being used? How is it being stored? Is it secure? What are their responsibilities when there are breaches? I hope that in the future, that these counterparties are able to do their business without having to take on all that liability as well. That it no longer is necessary for them to actually see the data. They're able to actually confirm, though, through the network that certain conditions have been met.
I've been studying up on how that's going to be rolled out in Utah and Colorado as well. So it's going to be the entire US at some point. So this is really important stuff that Riley's working on. I want to get to how you started working on that, Riley. You started a company at the beginning of your career that solved a problem with scooter handlebars. How did you get from there to Sovereign Identity and then Trinsic?
Well, the scooter handlebars goes all the way back to high school when I was really into riding scooters. This is sort of freestyle, razor scooter style, kick scooter style scooters. For anybody who's into action sports of most kinds, there's typically a trade-off between strength and weight. You want stuff that's lightweight, but you want it to be strong. And I came out with this idea, instead of using tubing for the handlebar that you hold onto, to use a solid extruded piece of metal. Instead of using steel or chromoly, an alloy, which was used in most bars, we used aluminum. So it was lightweight aluminum, but typically aluminum was weaker. But because we were using a solid extrusion instead of tubing, it was not prone to snapping.
I like it. My dad has his master's in metallurgy. So people start talking about alloys and I'm like, ooh.
Yeah. And I thought that that's what I was going to do with my life. I ended up late high school, made some life changes, and ended up on a mission trip to Taiwan. In Taiwan, I met my co-founder, Michael, whose dad is a co-founder of another Kickstart portfolio company called Clarivine. So Michael grown up in the startup ecosystem in Utah and really introduced me to the world of tech startups as opposed to scooter startups. So when we got back from Taiwan, started at school, always had in the back of our minds that we wanted to do something together. In the meantime, as the first person in my family to go to college, I thought it would be a really useful thing for me to get a stamp on my resume, something like McKinsey or Goldman or something like that. So in order to kind of differentiate myself from all the other people that looked like me and talked like me at my university, also studying finance, I looked to go get the most off-the-wall differentiated job that I possibly could. And that ended up being at Sovereign Foundation, where I was the first employee. It was a nonprofit. It was blockchain meets identity project. What ended up happening, as I already mentioned, is that I got involved with Sovereign. And after about a couple of months of an internship, I realized, wow, there is so much to do in this space. I called up my now co-founder, Michael, and said, you've got to come join me here. So he joined me at Sovereign. He was the first software engineer. I was the first kind of business hire. And we helped grow that organization for a couple of years and then ended up seeing some gaps in the market that we thought we could fill. That was the start of Trinsic. So I think maybe a takeaway there is that we got really deep in a niche. And I just spent lots and lots of nights and weekends reading technical papers and diving really, really deep into this very niche thing that most people have no idea what is going on behind the scenes. So the idea for Trinsic was joining an industry that was growing at an important time, becoming somewhat of a subject matter expert as fast as we possibly could, and then seeing gaps in the market that we could help address. We are not the first ones to realize that digital identity online is broken, but I think we were the first ones to take some of the more innovative and newer approaches to solving the problem and productizing those into a really great developer experience that application builders really liked.
I like that you highlighted the fact that, yeah, you weren't the first people to realize that it was broken. So it's an important takeaway, I think, for entrepreneurs. And Dalton, you can jump in here and correct me or add to it. But entrepreneurs don't have to be the first one in the space, but they have to understand the problem and the customer and everything enough to be able to do it orders of magnitude better than other players in the space. And that's what's so exciting about the way you're doing it at Trinsic. And a learning, I think, for entrepreneurs, like, don't be turned off if you're not the first person in the space. You don't have to pioneer space necessarily to be an entrepreneur, but you have to have that understanding of the problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Oftentimes when we ask the question to entrepreneurs that are pitching us, tell us about the competition, the right answer that they think we want to hear is that nobody else is doing this. And more often than not, when I hear that we don't have any competitors, I think either you haven't actually surveyed the landscape well enough, or this isn't a market that people care about yet. So what we're looking for is the team that's likely to go win in that space, in a space that's coveted, valuable, and they have the right strategy for it. So I think novelty at times can be overrated, but when there's competition and really, really talented teams of people going after an opportunity, it tends to signal that where there's smoke, there's fire. And you don't want to be the, kind of lone voice in the wilderness crying out. You actually want to be in the game where people are paying attention to it, adopting solutions, and you're just going to move faster, smarter. They're doing it in a different way than the other people are doing it, or it enables us to do something that we cannot do. In this sense, what is it that we're doing that is 10x better? Well, we're allowing verifications of credentials with zero knowledge sharing, with zero passing of data across the network, which completely eliminates the concerns around data breaches, third-party sharing of information, and so on.
I think one thing that helped us tell our story in terms of the competitive landscape, especially given that I mentioned we didn't just come up with this idea, we're not the first people to realize identity is broken. It really helped to, like Dalton mentioned, understand the landscape really well and where we fit inside it, because this market is very, very big. Of all the problems out there, which is the one that we are solving really, really well? And while we maybe aren't the only ones in this space, we have had to be novel and take contrarian positions in the market that are differentiated from competitors and experiment with new frontiers and push the boundaries of what existed already in order to establish that differentiation. And I think the right way to maybe think about it, or the way that I've thought about it, is that we are, standing on the shoulders of many giants that have come before us in our identity industry. And yet we also need to see a little bit further ourselves than what has been seen before. And then, of course, figure out a way to productize that and take it to market in a way that customers will resonate with.
You mentioned you have to really understand where you fit. How did you come to that understanding at Trinsic, and what could other entrepreneurs learn from that?
One thing was understanding the players, which customer segments they were targeting, and then, again, seeing the gaps, like Adobe and Figma, where Photoshop is one of the most iconic software brands and products ever. So how did Figma exist? Well, I think they probably took a fundamental concept of design that wasn't brand new, and they had some novelty that they brought in terms of the multiplayer experiences, in terms of the customer segments that they were targeting. And some of those things enabled them to expand the pie by taking maybe another chunk of the market and then expanding that chunk alongside maybe some of the competitors.
I think part of this understanding of the gap comes from just being in the fight and, understanding what the customers are saying and how they're responding to the existing solutions. In my view, most breakthrough innovation, or I'd say disruptive innovation, generally occurs not from studying the marketplace. This isn't like a consulting play where you go out and you do the market map and you define the strengths and weaknesses. I think that's useful to do just to understand the landscape. But I think the entrepreneurs that really innovate are probably not spending a lot of time trying to understand how their competitors are spending their time. They're more focused on their customers and really listening to the needs of their customer base. And so that would be the only thing that I would add is it's necessary to understand what your competitors are doing, but it's not sufficient in order to come up with innovation. You can be misled oftentimes by what the competitors are doing. They have their own legacy, trajectories, and momentum and reasons for doing the things that they're doing. And I think if you want to be a differentiated category defining company, it'll generally come from the founders developing deep domain expertise and earning the right to innovate by staying close to their customers and testing different propositions with their customers. And I think it also comes from a deep conviction about why this problem hasn't been solved yet and why your approach is going to work. And that's the challenge of the entrepreneur, is you can't find that by doing a landscape survey, a market map. You don't get to that level of insight by doing the kind of business consultant review of the space. You do it by rolling up your sleeves and getting in the fight. And over time, you earn the right to innovate because you gain more knowledge and perspective than anybody else out there.
Thank you. Okay, so Riley, it sounds a lot like, and you used words like blockchain meets identity. And where does it fit into the Web3 context? Like, is it adjacent? Is it part of Web3? Is it nothing like it at all? Like, where does it fit?
I think that it depends on what you mean by Web3. If you think about Web3 as a set of philosophical beliefs about user control and self-sovereignty, then I think absolutely, sign me up. We fall into that camp. A lot of people, though, use the term Web3 in their day-to-day lives as shorthand for a set of technologies like blockchain, NFTs, DAOs, tokens, etc. And there's a lot of connotation that comes along with that and assumptions about which technologies are used and how and things like that. If you use the Web3 term in those terms, I think we are less of a Web3 company. Ultimately, it's probably mostly semantics, and I try to just spend most of our time talking to customers and understanding what they need and building those things. So I try not to worry too much about how we're labeled. If others label us as Web3, I'm happy with it. And if they don't, then that's fine too.
Dalton, how do you think Trinsic fits into a Web3 context?
I would guess that the next version of a lot of these companies that we're talking about will not want to be branded Web3 because it's so loaded. This category is very controversial. Even among our investor base, you'll find investors that say, I absolutely hate this category. And you'll have others that say, I think that this could be the future, which to me actually makes it more interesting. I like when there are extreme positions on things. And if you talk to somebody who's a Bitcoin maximalist, they will think that anything outside of Bitcoin is complete heresy and garbage. The next person who doesn't believe at all in crypto, they'll think that the Bitcoin maximalist is completely insane. And then you talk to somebody who's deep into the Ethereum network, and they're going to think that the Bitcoin maximalists have completely missed the boat on being able to upgrade their networks to be more serviceable for a variety of needs and use cases. So it is a category that's full of ideology and strongly held beliefs. And it's also jam-packed with scams and rug pulls. And particularly, we're very sensitive to this as investors. We have reputations on the line. We don't want to participate in rug pulls and scams. What we're looking for are companies and entrepreneurs that are solving important problems using the technologies at hand. And I do think that blockchain has a place to play in this world, and that there are problems that can be uniquely addressed through decentralized systems. For me, the people who are most passionate about crypto, privacy preservation, empowering users, decentralizing power sources so that it's more fair for those who are participating in a network, I see a lot of that in what Trinsic is doing. And I don't think we'll be talking about Web3 10 years from now. I do think we'll be talking about decentralized systems, and we'll be talking about self-sovereignty 10 years from now, no doubt in my mind.
My first meeting with Kickstart was with Gavin. About 15 minutes into the pitch, Gavin said, "Oh, you sound like this other company that uses blockchain. Have you ever looked into that?" I said, "Well, yeah," and I explained how the platform works. And he asked, "Did you just pitch me a blockchain company without saying the word blockchain in the first sentence?" And I said, "Yes." And then, there's, one thing led to the next, and here we are now. So for what it's worth, our platform supports both the Bitcoin and Ethereum blockchains. It also supports the traditional DNS infrastructure and non-blockchain based systems. So we play nice with all the ecosystems that are out there and are pretty agnostic to the specific technical implementation. But as Dalton said, we do have some strong opinions about our ideological beliefs about the way that we want the future to pan out. And regardless of what you believe the future iteration of the web is and how that future will pan out, whether you think it's crypto native, on-chain, there will still be needs to present your off-chain credentials in an on-chain context, your university diploma to prove that you are eligible to do certain work for a DAO. Or if you believe that the future of the internet is based on generative AI, and if you've seen any of the generative AI created LinkedIn accounts, with fake Harvard degrees, or if you've seen GPT-4 can hire TaskRabbit people to fill out CAPTCHAs for it so that it can pass the "Are you a robot?" tests. There's a need for identity in the future of that web as well. Or if you think the future of the web is an IoT-based, hardware-infused world where there are sensors and things everywhere, you could imagine identity touches everything there. If you want to hop in a self-driving car, you tap your phone, open the door, hop in. And that's all you need to do, as opposed to sort of signing up for brand new applications every time you want to get on a different scooter to drive down the road 2 blocks or whatever. These are all future iterations of the web that I think will probably all be true to some degree. But regardless of how you see that panning out, identity touches it all. So it's important that we are compatible with and play nice with all the different systems of where the web is going in the future.
As this conversation went on, like, I love the highlighting of the fact that you have values that you stand for. Like, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And Dalton, your point of like, people don't want to be associated with Web3, but there's some things they'll say, but it might be like, oh, are you Web3? Because it can be tempting for entrepreneurs to chase like the next big thing where it's like, okay, Web3, that's it. I'm going to do a Web3 company or Web5 or whatever it might be. I think the lesson here for those listening is that it's not about being part of the next big thing. It's going back to what Riley said earlier about like, I was really deep into this problem and I was really able to figure it out and to solve it and figure out how I could do this better and make a space for me. And this is where I fit into that space. And I think that is the takeaway for those listening. I'm not sure if either of you have thoughts on that.
At Kickstart, we've always been focused on trying to solve meaningful problems, real problems. And so I think that whenever there's kind of a new, exciting category, there's this tendency to think that if you just slap the label on it, it makes it important, relevant, it communicates useful information about what you're doing. And there is some truth to that. But I also think that, to the example that Riley just gave, when he first pitched Trinsic, he pitched us a self-sovereign identity company that relied to a certain extent on blockchain technology without ever even mentioning blockchain technology. And I think that you see this right now with AI as well. You know, it's every pitch deck we see now has those letters in it somewhere, it feels like. And almost every analytics company now will say that they're AI, whether or not that's actually the case. And so I just feel like it's important to look past these buzzwords that we apply to our businesses and instead focus on what is the deep problem that we're addressing and why is this a compelling, valuable solution that's being developed? And then you can get into why AI is the answer or why blockchain is the answer. For me, it never starts with, oh, you've got an AI company or you've got a Web3 company or you've got a SaaS company. It's, well, get me excited about this problem. Let's talk about the solution and then tie it out for me why the new technology or these new trends that are emerging lend themselves particularly well to solving that problem. That's where I get excited. But if you start with the solution or kind of the buzzwords, I think oftentimes you risk coming across as somebody who's just trying to participate in a momentum story, as opposed to a deep conviction about a problem that you really, really, really want to contribute to the solution on. The entrepreneurs that build iconic companies, they are relentlessly focused on serving their customers over a longer arc. And they don't actually really care that much whether the solution happens to be AI driven or it's an analytics solution or it's a blockchain solution. They're laser focused on the actual customer and their problems and how they're going to help them have a better life. You can decouple that from the technology.
As you were talking, you're kind of going about like, you want to hear about the problem, then you want to hear about this, you want to hear about this. I think that's actually a really great format for a pitch meeting. So hopefully people were taking notes and that they can present in that order, which should be interesting. This has been such an engaging and fun discussion. Really appreciate the insights and you being willing to come on the show and share your story and talk about Trinsic. And we like to end with one question that we ask every guest on the show, and that is, what is an effective practice that you've implemented in your work or personal life that you think has had a great impact on your success?
Well, first, let me say, I love this question because as I listen to your podcast, I take some of the insights from other entrepreneurs and have applied them in my own life. So thanks to everybody who's been on your podcast in the past, and hopefully something I say will be helpful. I think the meta point here is I had a boss who would say, easy choices, hard life, hard choices, easy life. And as I look back, I think I tend to sometimes choose things that are hard for me. Things that are very challenging, obviously starting a company being one. And I think that there's merit to that. I think a tactical thing that I do is I wake up really early and try to make meaningful progress on my most important priority every single day before my kids wake up and before the Slack messages start coming in and before the flurry of the day just starts happening. And I find that if I can start the day having really made meaningful progress on something, it just sets the whole rest of the day up for a whole another level of success. And that's been really helpful for me.
How early are you up? 3 a.m.?
No, not that early. No. I try to get a 2-hour deep work session in before things start happening. So, 4:35.
That's amazing. I aspire to be able to do that someday. So you've inspired me. Dalton, any thoughts on that?
I'd be a hypocrite if I said, oh yeah, get up early before your kids are up. I mean, so often I'm scrambling in the morning trying to get the kids to school, and I can see the value in that, certainly. What I'm doing right now in my life is I'm trying to hold two what feels like competing ideas at the same time for myself, which is one, I matter and my work really, really matters and it's important. And then on the other hand, I don't matter that much and I'll be forgotten one day. Life continues to go on. And so it helps me take the pressure off. So I wanted just enough pressure to stay hungry and motivated and chasing meaning in what I do. At the same time, I don't want to get ill thinking if I don't do this perfectly, or if I'm not good enough, or if I don't perform, then I'm a failure, or the future of the world hangs in the balance on whether or not I'm working hard enough. And so for me, I'm trying to get to that point of equanimity where I know that my work is important and it matters and I'm leaning into it and I'm doing my best. And at the same time, I'm doing it with a peace of mind, knowing that at the end of the day, everything fades away to a certain extent. I have to keep my own existence in perspective in this grand scheme and not let this delusion of my own importance become its own burden upon me.
I think every entrepreneur could benefit from a similar mindset where we have to both hold in our minds that what we're doing is really important and that we're going to have a big impact on the world without letting your company be your whole identity and your whole life. So yeah, I appreciate that, Dalton.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that insight. I've been thinking a lot too about duality and what that means and holding two ideas in your head. So I really appreciate that thought. But Riley and Dalton, thank you so much for joining our discussion today and for all that you shared. Riley, you've done a really great job of not only helping it so that your mom can understand all of this, but so that I can understand all of this. So we're really grateful. But if people really want to dive in and learn more about the work that you're doing, where can they go?
I'm always happy to connect on LinkedIn or Twitter. You can just search my name. We also have a podcast we started recently called the Future of Identity podcast, where we interview some of our customers or other players in our ecosystem who are building ID tech solutions. And I think there's some really interesting conversations there that if you enjoyed this topic, listeners might also enjoy some of those conversations as well.
We'll check it out and we'll be sure to include a link for that in our show notes. So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, now I'm like, oh, I hope that I podcasted well with you since you're a pro. So thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thanks a lot. This was an awesome conversation. Love Kickstart and appreciate the invitation.
Thanks for having me, Karen, and Riley. Thanks for joining. That was really fun.
And of course, thank you for listening as we dive deep into what it takes to create the perfect pitch. If you want to learn more about our investor, Dalton Wright from Kickstart, or our CEO, Riley Hughes from Trinsic, we'll have a link to the company and a longer bio in our show notes at kickstartfund.com. You can listen to more episodes of Perfect Pitch wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you like what you're learning, leave us a review or rating. We'll be back next time with more insights from entrepreneurs and the investors who fund them. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing.